Quick show of hands, real quick. How many people checked the weather this morning or checked the weather before coming to Las Vegas? All right. I'm going to bet that the majority of you aren't weather geeks, maybe like the many of us at the weather company. You're actually trying to make a decision, maybe what to pack, how the flight's going to be impacted by the weather coming to Las Vegas. Ultimately, it's about decisions, and it's about that secondary or tertiary decision that you're trying to make as a consumer and maybe as a business that weather plays a really impactful role in. And that's where we see our opportunity overall. And so goal for today is really to share with you or reintroduce to you the weather company in the context of IoT. Maybe share a little bit about how IBM thought about us at the weather company as maybe the greatest IoT story never told. Share a little bit of thinking around how our data, how we think about data, and how we think weather data in particular plays an incredibly important role in making better decisions. So we set this up a little bit. This was my favorite headline when the announcement of the acquisition came out in October, with some of the jokes being, the board got together and essentially said, we're going to get into cloud, and they bought the weather company. And a lot of people, including the media, including people in business, didn't really understand it at first. And I would say probably didn't even understand it until some of the more recent announcements that we've made around Watson advertising or our work with GoGo around airlines information. But just to kind of set the stage about who the weather company really is. The weather company has two primary businesses. There's a consumer business, which many of you might know is the Weather Channel app, weather.com, Weather Underground. That's an advertising-based business. It's the largest part of our business, actually, at the weather company. And we've been in that business for 30 plus years. But then there's also the B2B business. And the B2B business is an analytics, software, data, hardware-based business with primary focus in the aviation, insurance, energy, and broadcast media verticals. And so over the last 2 years almost, IBM and the weather company on the B2B side have had a commercial strategic relationship where they saw a ton of value in the data, the technical platform that we've reinvented over the last 3 years to be mobile first in its scope, the technical scale that we have. Right now, we are the second largest user of Amazon Web Services in the world, only behind Amazon. We're the largest user of Google Compute in the world because Google doesn't use their own SaaS service that's available to the public. And so they loved the scale that we were operating at. Our global scale with the relationships that we have both on the consumer and on the business front. And so it was something that they saw an immense amount of value in creating a relationship. And then over the last 2 years, they started to understand a little bit more about the consumer business and how the consumer business really was an endpoint to collecting data. So it's not just the data that's coming off of the machines and the businesses that we support on the B2B side, but it's also the data that we're seeing and how users are engaging with the Weather Channel's properties on the consumer front. Every one of those interactions that we see every single day comes with a location ping, a lat long, so that we can actually provide them with the best weather forecast in the world. And so all of that culminated in an announcement in October where IBM was buying all of the digital assets, the digital IP, the technology associated with the weather company. And now we're proud to be a standalone business inside of IBM, powering the future really around IoT and around weather insights as a service. And so I have a quick little video that we'll share to summarize up kind of where we are at the weather company. That's what IBM really bought, right? That's why they got so excited as a collective team in this asset that we were bringing in and new skills that we were going to be able to bring to IBM. So when we step back just a little bit and we kind of think about the world that we live in, we're on the cusp of maybe the most transformative industrial revolution that we've ever seen. We've moved from steam to electricity, electricity to electronics. Now we're moving to connectivity. And that's not just the human-to-human connectivity that we all know via social media and personal interactions, but it's the machine-to-machine connectivity. And maybe even more importantly, it's the machine-to-human connectivity and that cognitive understanding of how to take advantage of all this data and actually turn it into better insights and how to turn it into something more valuable to decision-making on a daily basis. I saw a recent stat that there was going to be 25 billion IoT-connected devices by 2020. And I'm sure that we all know that the vast majority of those devices are going to be consumer-oriented, phones, wearable devices, cars, et cetera. But in the end, it's going to be the revenue and the value are really going to be created at the enterprise level. And all of the insight and the decision-making that we can actually foster collectively in this room and in this industry is really where we're focused and where we're pushing. And so as we think about kind of our future and this industry overall, we believe that we all benefit from data-driven insights that predict future behavior. We're really moving from this process economy to more of an insight economy. And not knowing has a real cost. So you think about maybe the airlines industry. If they don't know that a storm is coming in or that certain maintenance is likely to occur or be needed on certain aircraft, they might release the staff or release the crew early. That crew gets to the airport. They're on the clock now according to FAA regulations, and they're hanging out. They're sitting around, the clock's ticking, and that might disrupt broader flight operations, so there's a real cost to that. There's also the opportunity cost on a retail organization where maybe they didn't know that certain weather or certain kinds of conditions were going to actually play a role in improving sales in their business, and so they didn't have a clear understanding of logistics, where their products were in the supply chain, where they were maybe even in the store to take best advantage of that overall. And so from a standpoint of weather, we see that there's about $500 billion over the last year of economic impact that weather was related to. And about 30% of the Fortune 500 companies in Q1 use weather as some form of excuse in their quarterly earnings. And so we see that as a huge opportunity to kind of remove that inefficiency. And so at Weather and IBM, we're mostly focused on keeping people safe, reducing tragedies around the world, removing that excuse of weather from business decision making, and then on a consumer level, really making sure that we're empowering users and consumers to make better daily decisions so that ultimately that plays a real value in that virtuous cycle of value. So as we think about data, right, we think about it in this hierarchy of value. Right? So at the very bottom, there's atomic data. Right? It's all this noise coming off of IoT devices. It's the things that we produce via all of our forecasting algorithms. There's a forecast, current conditions, geolocations, et cetera. A step up above that, a value equation from atomic is aggregated data. So here, what we're doing is we're harmonizing all of the different endpoints. We're taking all that unstructured data from around the world, government data, government alerts, car data coming off of vehicles that are sharing their windshield wipers or their anti-lock braking information for us. And we're aggregating that into something that's really easy for businesses to use. Ultimately, that ladders up to insights. And in the weather context, we use this as the best time to do something. And so you'll see some of the examples later on that I have. It's kind of how we use this idea of insights to provoke the best time for businesses and or consumers to engage with the experiences or the parts of their business that are most impacted. But ultimately, the most valuable aspect is action. How do we take insights, which come in the forms of dashboards or reports or know-how, and actually build products and services that allow for action to take place so that there's some human element in understanding what that insight means, but then ultimately automating it so that there's an action from it. And you'd probably not be surprised, but the real value is actually the exact inverse in that pyramid. Right? There's less value in pure atomic data. What you have to do is you have to bring all that know-how together, combine those data sets to create something even more valuable. And so as we think about it in the context of our business, We have Blue Mix developer portals so that people can get access to all the data that's coming in via our systems and via our partnerships and relationships. We're creating partnerships off of these aggregated data sets. So I run all things inside of our consumer business, and I manage our relationships with Apple, Google, Facebook, et cetera, and they love us. And they use our weather data throughout their enterprise because of the fact that we're aggregating it and making it simple for their developers to use. Ultimately, that insight, we're building an entirely new business at IBM around this insight economy with our IoT and analytics platform, and ultimately that leads to where Watson and artificial intelligence comes in, and then a couple of very specific products that we have at Weather that we've used for advertising purposes that we refer to as weather effects and location effects, which are really about making triggered decisions based on where media should run on websites, on apps, based on weather and location and all of that product insight. So ultimately, for consumers, businesses, and governments, we believe these actionable insights are some of the most powerful tools that are going to be available. So how do we do it? So we deliver about 100 terabytes of data ingested into our platform a day. That's coming from about 530 million personal weather station reports. So we have a network of about 200,000 personal weather stations around the world. These are individuals that have bought a product from a third party for anywhere from $200 to $1,500, put it in their backyard, and they stream to us live weather data every 2.5 seconds. It's actually one of those secret elements that have made our forecasts one of the most accurate in the world. We see 9 million webcam uploads every single day, whether that coming from DOT or personal webcams, and we're using our Alchemy Vision APIs out of Watson to really understand what we're seeing inside of the context of those webcam uploads. We're seeing users check in with weather, helping us to correct our forecast, where if we're saying that we think it's raining, they're telling us that it's not, and statistically we're weaving that into our forecast. And then those relationships with Apple and Samsung and Google and other OEMs around the world, they've started embedding barometric pressure sensors inside of all of your phones, all of the highest end phones. And so we're pulling that barometric pressure based on those relationships to enhance the forecast so that we can actually see how to deliver a forecast that's the most accurate down to the phone level. But you can't just build a great forecast from ground observations. It's that 62 miles that was in the video, right, that you have to really understand. And there's a certain amount of data that comes from government weather balloons, reported in a number of locations around the world multiple times a day. But we saw real value in our relationships on the B2B side to connect that into the forecasting engine. And so we're pulling in real-time data off of aircraft. We power about 90% of the airlines in the world with our B2B solutions, 55,000 flights a day. And you might have read a recent announcement just in the last couple of weeks where we created a partnership with GoGo Internet, where we're taking the turbulence data that we're sensing off of pilots' tablets and phones tied to our platform, and off of sensors that are in the plane, and we're reporting it live. We're streaming it live back to our systems so that we can actually distribute that across the industry, creating safer flights, a better understanding of fuel consumption, and maybe even a better understanding associated with maintenance costs, because a certain amount of turbulence will actually force a plane into maintenance mode. And so all of that ultimately creates something I refer to as the Waze of airlines, which is pretty cool. Then what we do is we aggregate all of that data and we run it across 151 forecast model runs. So at Weather, we use all of the government weather models out there. And we have 250 meteorologists at the Weather Company. We take atmospheric science pretty seriously. And what they do is they look at all of those models and they cherry pick the best elements. And we use an ensemble method. So we bring all of that, the best of all of those models together with all of that data to create this forecast. But in order to do that in near real time, because we recognized that the world was moving entirely to mobile and everything that moved needed this data, we had to build an entirely new system over the last 3 years. So it's an entirely data agnostic because we're collecting this data from all different types of either sensors or government structures. It's a 100% cloud-based platform that ingests, transforms, and ultimately distributes this information to the tune of about 26 billion forecast requests a day. And that's just on our current load, and we have projections that it's going to quintuple over the course of the next 2 years based on certain relationships that we're creating and the new IBM partnerships that are coming in. So what that then does is you have a great forecast, but people don't trust that forecast if it's not delivered to where they actually are. So then what our meteorologists did is they gridded the entire Earth. So rather than having just about several 100,000 forecast points around the world, they turned that into a 4-kilometer grid so that every location in the world could be mapped. And this image, our meteorologists get really upset with this image because it actually extends out into the ocean as well. And so we have a whole new maritime business offering associated with this new forecasting methodology so that we can deliver precise forecasts down to 2.2 billion locations. And then what we did is we completely shifted the paradigm because forecasts typically were only delivered 6 times a day. And what we wanted to do is we wanted to say, hey, listen, the world's moving so fast, everything's mobile oriented. You need to do it in real time. You need to deliver it 96 times a day, every 15 minutes, in order for it to be meaningful to the businesses and the users that are consuming it. So what does that all mean, right? It means global weather at global reach. Proud to say that we're on 800 million devices, million phones with our consumer business and application, and we're powering nearly 2 billion devices worldwide using our data, whether that be with our branded solutions, Weather Channel, Weather Underground, or just using our data APIs into their products. And all of that said, it leads us to being the most accurate forecast in the world. And I know a lot of people just assume the weatherman flips a coin and decides whether it's going to rain or not. But the J.D. Power of weather forecasting, a company called Forecast Watch, actually puts out this research every single month. And they compare what we said we thought the forecast was going to be to what actually occurred, both in temperature, high and low temperature, as well as precipitation. And so ultimately, you can see across every day part and every region of the world, we're number one. And we're really proud of that growing differentiation that we see relative to other forecasting businesses, because that difference is the matter of real profit or hyper growth for certain businesses. And so we're excited that this is a key factor in our solution. But maybe from the consumer standpoint, because that's where I live most of my team's day, I'm most excited about that Weather Channel and the Weather Channel apps and the Weather Company products with Weather Underground are now the 3rd largest daily habit behind Google and Facebook. So 25, it's actually up to 35 million now since these numbers came out. 35 million users use our products every single day. And what that means is that there's this really robust data set coming in from how users engage with our products. And then we're the 2nd largest location-based services company in the US, behind Google Maps. People use us and trust us, and they provide us that long information that we can then ultimately feed into our insight engines at the IBM level, so that we can understand where people are moving or how they're moving anonymously, so we can have better insights for businesses that are in those markets. So what does this all mean? What are the products and services, and what are we seeing, and how we're taking the science in these products and turning them into real valuable assets for businesses? So in insurance, we've created hail alerts. So I think it's Farmers Insurance and State Farm actually use this product, and they've saved millions of dollars a year because of our understanding of maybe where those users and those consumers are based on their profiles, where weather and hail is going to be most impacted, maybe even where, if there's a connected car experience in the future, we can actually deliver an alert to tell that user to move their car inside the garage, and we're saving millions of dollars of claim, 52% of potential claims cost avoided. On the retail side, this is that weather effects example. We're working with some of the largest retailers, if not the largest retailer in the world, and we're taking 10,000 SKUs, 10,000 of their products over the last 3 years, and we're running them through this engine. And we're understanding kind of what weather, whether it be historical weather, current weather, or future weather, play a role in how people buy their goods. We saw in the storms over the winter up in Boston that moms tended to buy comfort foods, soup and Pop-Tarts, when they were stuck in with all the snow, right? And we saw this data coming off of these retailers. But dads, they bought more beer. So it was pretty interesting to see the dynamic there. And really what this means is that we're seeing 24% increase in sales, but even more increase in efficiency of how they spend their media on digital platforms. That extended very quickly into supply chain and demand planning. So we're looking at the vehicles that they're using to move their products around the country, so that we can actually tie how they're thinking about marketing their products all the way to how they're delivering the products to the stores, with an increase or a reduction in out-of-stock frequency by about 10%. Talked a little bit earlier about aviation and turbulence alerts. We're seeing a 50% reduction in crew injuries and maintenance inspections because we're actually reporting where that turbulence is, and we're helping planes route around the turbulence and around the storms in a more efficient manner, also maximizing fuel savings. Airport congestion. This is increasingly a big problem as more and more flights are occurring. And how do we make sure that we're staging the right types of delays or the right types of cancellations even before planes are there at the airport or the consumers are at the airport? We're seeing about $4.5 million of annual savings in fuel and flight time associated with that as well. Energy and utility. I think the Department of Energy said that there was about a $100 billion impact associated with blackouts in the US over the last several years. And so what we've done is we've worked with energy companies around short-term and long-term forecasts around geothermal, wind, solar forecasting so that they can actually plan better for the grid. And now we're starting to work with companies like Nest via our Google relationship to look at how weather plays a role in how they use the Nest platform to manage the demand load across the energy grid. And then in government emergency management. So I think it was Hurricane Katrina that our forecasts were spot on, and they were 60 hours in advance. And if the government of New Orleans actually had a better understanding of how then to mobilize the city around that, maybe there would have been less damage or less lives lost. And we saw that same scenario in Atlanta when snowpocalypse occurred, when that 1.5 inches of ice fell and the entire city shut down and people were living for almost a full day on the sides of roads or inside of businesses. And so we were telling the city that they needed to move the population earlier in the day, and they didn't take that recommendation, and it led to a lot of challenges. And so we're actually seeing, because of that, because of those specific examples, governments are now starting to engage with us more, and we're using the IoT-based infrastructure that they have in those cities to help enhance these models and these forecasts. But it doesn't just happen at the business level, right? It happens at the consumer level. We talked about those 25 billion IoT devices that are coming out by 2020, most of which are going to be consumer-oriented. And so we think about that as a starting point for some of this IoT engagement and more rich data collection. So you can imagine, if I walk you through the day in the life, we're working with IoT watering companies around how they can integrate our data sets and how we can understand the onset or offset of that watering schedule to improve our forecast. And we can actually weave them into our app. So we're thinking about how our application becomes more of a daily habit IoT platform. It's a connected platform that allows users to engage with all of these services that are weather connected. We're working with wearables companies. We made some announcements. Ginny Rometty, our CEO, made an announcement at CES working with Under Armour. We're working with some others in the space as well around how we can actually take all of that information that's being collected on those personal devices and actually turn them into recommendations. So we've created a run weather index. So we look at all of the conditions that factor into running, and then we're matching them to how you perform. So maybe I perform better in less humidity, maybe a higher temperature, I run faster, I have better performance. So now all of a sudden the Weather Channel, the weather company, Under Armour, can actually start making recommendations to users as to when they should run. And so I kind of factored this into we're helping users hack their life a little bit. We're giving them a little bit of time back in their life so that they're actually feeling more fulfilled. We're doing this also in the healthcare space. There's some really interesting companies that have internet-connected inhalers. And we know via all the research and science that we do at IBM that certain types of air conditions, air quality, maybe closer to roads, have a bigger impact on asthmatics. We know now statistically that lightning strikes are highly correlated to asthma attacks because of the energy in the air and in the particles in the air. And that leads to conditions that ultimately we could maybe prevent by giving users or sufferers of asthma an early alert. And that could be done through our Weather Channel products, or it could be done through these distributed partnerships with the IoT-based device companies. And then maybe lastly, we're thinking a lot about the car. We built our entire platform for things that move, right? We built it for the mobile world. And as we think about the connected car experience and you start to understand users' behaviors in those cars, their rituals that they take, at 8 a.m. in the morning and maybe 5 p.m. in the evening, where they're frequently going, you can start to understand a whole lot about their behavior and maybe who they are in an anonymous way, so you can deliver even more tailored services. So some specific examples that we've built into our Samsung application is a smart weather alarm clock. So we're now starting to let users wake up earlier if they're going to be impacted by a certain volume of rain or a certain volume of snow, so that they can actually go out there and beat the rest of the traffic. And so what I would do is I leave this quote at the end of every presentation, and I use it a lot with our teams. And it was great. It was by the Dropbox head of design. It said, remember that you're not competing against other services. You're competing against people's habits. And whether it be a business's habit or a consumer habit, we're actually thinking a lot about it. It's like we should be aligning with their habits. We don't need to disrupt their habits. What we need to do is we need to align with them, and as we align with them, we can create even more value for them on a regular and daily basis. And so I'm excited for what Weather Company is now inside of IBM. I'm excited that we're starting to really push the limits of what IoT thinking really is with the scale that we have, and how weather is a really critical role there. And I hope that you guys take away from this a real understanding that we're thinking about the IoT space as a collection of data that needs to be turned into an insight that ultimately leads to an action and creates even more economic value for everybody involved.